Jake Black awoke to the soft golden rays of sunlight filtering through the expansive windows of his luxury penthouse. The view of Central Park sprawled beneath him, an oasis of green amid the urban sprawl of New York City. It was a picturesque morning, the kind that made life feel vibrant and promising. Yet, despite the beauty outside, a sense of disillusionment weighed heavily on Jake's heart. The walls of his penthouse, adorned with modern art and expensive furnishings, felt more like a gilded cage than a home. He had built an empire, a banking institution that was a titan in the financial world. But somewhere along the way, the soul of the organization had been lost. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed, his feet touching the cool hardwood floor. A faint reflection caught his eye in the mirror opposite him. The man staring back was not just a billionaire. He was a figure wrapped in anonymity, always shielded by tailored suits and a polished image. But today, he felt like an imposter in his own skin. The glimmer of wealth and prestige had dimmed, revealing a profound emptiness that gnawed at him. He had become a stranger to the very people he sought to serve. He stared at his reflection in the glass window, the city alive below him, a sharp contrast to the emptiness gnawing at his soul. He remembered when this view symbolized success, but now it felt like a distant reminder of a life he no longer recognized. A restlessness had been growing inside him, a discomfort he couldn't shake. He was tired of watching the world from above. He needed to step down and feel the ground beneath his feet, to understand what it truly meant to serve people. For the first time in years, Jake felt a flicker of fear, not of failure, but of discovering who he really was. With a deep breath, Jake pushed himself off the bed, the weight of his thoughts momentarily lifting as he prepared for the day. He had a plan forming in his mind, a radical idea that could shatter the comfortable bubble he lived in. He wanted to understand the ins and outs of his bank, not just from the lofty perch of a CEO, but from the perspective of the everyday customer. He was determined to see the reality his clients faced and to feel the pulse of the institution he had created. After a quick shower and a hasty breakfast, Jake called for his driver, James. The man was like a steadfast shadow, always at his side, but today would be different. "James," Jake said, his voice steady but urgent, "I need you to take me to the Fifth Avenue branch of Black Bank." James raised an eyebrow, his expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Of course, sir. But is everything all right? You usually don't visit the branches unannounced." Jake forced a smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I need to see how things are running. I want to experience it as a customer would, but I'll need to go incognito." "Incognito?" James echoed, glancing at Jake's impeccably tailored suit. "What do you have in mind? Something a little more casual," Jake replied, his mind racing with the details. He had already planned this out. He would disguise himself in shabby clothing and, for added effect, he would use a wheelchair and sunglasses. It would allow him to observe without drawing attention to himself, to blend in with the crowd, and to experience the bank's operations firsthand. A look of disbelief crossed James' face, but he nodded, understanding the resolve in Jake's voice. "Have you ever thought about what it's like to always be invisible, James?" Jake asked, his eyes on the bustling streets outside the window. His tone was casual, but there was something deeper lurking beneath the words. James, keeping his eyes on the road, replied calmly, "Invisible? For some, it's a relief. For others, it's a sentence." Jake fell silent, absorbing the answer. He was beginning to realize that his disguise wasn't just a change of clothes. It was an invitation to see the world from a perspective he had long ignored. Within the hour, Jake found himself dressed in an oversized sweatshirt, worn jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his brow. He sat in a wheelchair, a far cry from the polished image he was accustomed to projecting. As he looked in the mirror, he barely recognized the reflection staring back at him. This was a man who belonged to the streets, someone who had seen hardship and neglect. It felt strange, almost liberating to step outside of his billionaire persona, even if just for a day. He finished the disguise with dark sunglasses, making it feel as if he had limited vision as well. Then they were ready to go. The drive to the bank was filled with a tense silence, punctuated only by the hum of the city. Jake's heart raced with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. What would he discover? Would he be ready to face the reality that lay ahead? As they approached the bank, he could already see the familiar facade, the glass doors that welcomed thousands each day. But today, those doors would open to reveal a world he had long overlooked. After they parked, James maneuvered the wheelchair with Jake towards the entrance. The moment he crossed the threshold, he was enveloped by a burst of sounds, voices raised in frustration, the clattering of keyboards, and the dull thud of paperwork being shuffled. It was a chaotic symphony that set the tone for the experience he was about to endure. The bank was packed with customers, and Jake felt a wave of overwhelm wash over him. He passed on his wheelchair through the crowd, his eyes scanning the room. The long line snaked around the lobby, people shifting impatiently on their feet, their faces itched with annoyance. He caught snippets of conversations, snippets of the frustration that had become a familiar norm for the bank's patrons. "Can you believe this? I've been waiting for over an hour," a woman in front of him exclaimed, her voice tinged with exasperation. "Yeah, and no one seems to care," a man beside her replied, arms crossed tightly over his chest. "This is ridiculous." Jake's heart sank as he witnessed the neglect his customers faced. He had always prided himself on creating a customer-centric approach. But here, in the heart of his bank, it was evident that something was drastically wrong. The dismissive attitude of the staff was palpable. He observed a young teller, her eyes glued to the computer screen, oblivious to the growing line of customers waiting for assistance. As he wheeled himself closer to the service counters, he spotted Tom, the branch manager, leaning against a desk with his arms crossed. A smirk played on his lips as he surveyed the chaos, seemingly unfazed by the growing tide of discontent among the customers. "Can you believe this?" Jake murmured to himself, a mixture of disbelief and anger bubbling within him. He felt the frustration of the customers around him, and at that moment, he realized that his mission was more important than he had anticipated. He needed to confront not just the systemic issues, but also the leadership that had allowed this culture of neglect to flourish. As they approached the front of the line, Jake could feel eyes on him, glances filled with curiosity and pity. Customers waited impatiently, their expressions a mix of frustration and resignation. Jake could feel the weight of their collective dissatisfaction as he made his way toward the service desk, his heart racing with anticipation and trepidation. "Excuse me, could you help me?" he ventured, his voice surprisingly steady despite the discomfort of his disguise. A young woman behind the desk, her name tag reading Linda, barely glanced up from her computer screen. "Just a moment," she replied curtly, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as if he were an inconvenience. Jake's stomach twisted. He had expected some level of neglect, but this was disheartening. He shifted in his wheelchair, adjusting the tattered jacket he wore. He wanted to scream, to express the frustration bubbling inside him, but he held back, reminding himself of the purpose behind this charade. He looked around, noticing an elderly man shuffling toward the service desk, his cane tapping rhythmically on the floor. The man had a kind face, but his eyes reflected a deep weariness, a hint of the struggles he faced. Jake watched as the man approached Tom, the branch manager, who stood with his arms crossed, exuding an air of impatience. "Excuse me, sir," the elderly man said, his voice quavering slightly. "I have been waiting for over an hour. I just need to deposit this check." Tom barely acknowledged him, his gaze drifting toward a group of employees chatting in the corner, oblivious to the chaos around them. "You'll have to wait your turn," he snapped, a dismissive wave of his hand indicating the long line snaking behind the man. Jake's heart sank further. What kind of leader ignored the very customers who sustained the business? Jake's eyes narrowed as he observed the scene unfold. The elderly man's face fell, a mixture of confusion and hurt crossing his features. "I understand it's busy, but I really could use some assistance," he pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. "Like I said, wait," Tom reiterated, his tone sharp. He turned away, seemingly uninterested in the man's plight. Jake felt a surge of anger rises within him. This was the kind of behavior that had led to the systemic issues he had hoped to uncover. He fumbled with the edges of his jacket, wrestling with the urge to confront Tom directly. As Jake observed the crowded bank, he started noticing something he hadn't considered: the exhaustion on the faces of the employees. It wasn't just Tom, that the problem ran deeper than just poor management. It was a system that prioritized profit over people, and Jake realized that his fight would be longer and harder than he had anticipated. As the minutes ticked by, the line didn't seem to get any shorter. Jake glanced around, his heart aching for the various customers who sat in silent despair. A young mother juggled a squirming toddler while trying to balance her own impatience. An anxious teenager sat slumped in a chair, his phone glued to his hand, checking the time repeatedly as if willing to move faster. Jake could feel the tension in the air thickening, the frustration palpable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jake's turn approached. He rolled closer to the counter, his heart pounding. "Can I speak to the manager?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm, though the frustration seeped through. Linda looked up with a mixture of curiosity and annoyance. "I can help you," she replied, her tone flat. "What's your issue?" she said with an ironic smile. Jake took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I need to discuss my account. It's—" "Sir, we don't have time for long explanations right now. This is the fast service line," she interrupted, her fingers tapping impatiently against the desk. "Just tell me what you need in one sentence." As he stared at her, a mixture of disbelief and anger washed over him. "Calm down. I'm trying to voice my concerns about the service here," he replied, his voice rising slightly. "Is that too much to ask?" Before he could say another word, Tom approached, his expression one of irritation. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing as he took in Jake's shabby appearance. "Sir, we are over capacity, and we need to go fast here. How can I help you?" Jake felt a surge of indignation. "I've waited for hours, and now you are rushing me. I want to talk to you directly about the service, or lack thereof, that your customers are receiving." Tom shrugged, dismissing him with a wave of his hand. "Listen, we're busy, and I don't have time for this. If you have a bigger issue, you'll have to wait like everyone else on the other line." The words stung more than Jake expected. At that moment, he felt invisible, reduced to just another faceless complaint in a system that had long forgotten how to care. The voice in his head screamed for him to stand up, to reveal himself, to demand respect, but he knew that this was part of the experience he needed to endure. "I've been here for hours," Jake said, his frustration boiling over. "And I'm not the only one. Don't you see the problem?" Tom sighed, rolling his eyes dramatically. "I don't have time for drama. Do you want to be heard? Join the queue?" Jake's heart raced, and he clenched his fists in his lap. This was not how he envisioned this day going. He had come to understand the struggles of his customers, only to be met with apathy and disdain from those in charge. He shot a glance at the elderly man who was still waiting, now looking even more defeated. "Maybe it's not about being heard," Jake said quietly, though his voice trembled slightly. "Maybe it's about being seen." Tom's expression didn't change. "You can either wait or leave. Your choice." The silence that followed felt deafening. Jake took a moment, trying to process the utter lack of empathy that surrounded him. He had hoped that by going undercover, he would gain insights into how to improve the bank's culture, but all he felt was the weight of disappointment pressing down on him. As he turned to leave, he overheard the elderly man speaking again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to deposit my check. It's been so hard since my wife passed." The words hung in the air, heavy with sorrow. Jake's heart ached for the man whose struggle mirrored that of so many others in the bank. It was a reminder of the human experiences often overlooked in the relentless pursuit of profit. He felt a knot in his stomach, knowing that this was the reality his bank had perpetuated. Jake decided then and there that his mission was far more crucial than he initially believed. As he wheeled away from the counter, he caught Tom's eye one last time, his mind racing with thoughts of how to make a difference. "Things need to change," he muttered under his breath, the determination solidifying within him. With newfound resolve, he steered his wheelchair toward the exit, vowing to himself that he would not let this experience be in vain. The echoes of the weary customers would not fade away easily, and neither would his fight for their dignity. But Jake, still cloaked in his shabby disguise, felt an unfamiliar heat radiating through him. It coursed through his veins, igniting a fire of indignation that he struggled to contain. Tom, the dismissive manager, had just brushed him off for the third time, and Jake's patience was wearing thin. He turned around with James and re-entered the bank. "Look, I've waited long enough," Jake spat, his voice rising above the chatter of the bank. "You're treating people like they don't matter. This is unacceptable." Tom's eyes narrowed, his expression a blend of annoyance and condescension. "Sir, if you would just take a number and wait your turn." "No more waiting. You think this is just a game." Jake's heart raced, and he could feel the weight of the eyes around him, the stares of the other customers, all caught in this moment of confrontation. "Do you have any idea what it's like to be ignored? Do you think I have nothing to do? And I'm paying to get this service." The words hung in the air, a challenge that reverberated through the crowded space. Tom, caught off guard by the intensity of Jake's outburst, scoffed. "I don't have time for this, sir. We have procedures and you need to follow them. If you insist, I'll have to call security." Jake's emotions surged, and in a split second, he reached for the crutch that supported him. It was a desperate move, a flash of anger that he didn't fully comprehend. He swung it towards Tom, the wooden stick slicing through the air, but before it could connect, a collective gasp erupted from the crowd. Eyes widened and the sound of murmurs filled the room. "Stop! What are you doing?" someone shouted from the back, and before Jake could react, security was rushing toward him, their presence imposing and authoritative. "Sir, you need to calm down. You have to stop this," one of the guards said, his voice steady as he approached. Jake, feeling the adrenaline coursing through him, took a deep breath and let the crutch fall to the floor. The room was silent, all eyes fixed on him, the weight of the moment pressing down like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person in that bank who felt overlooked and disregarded. In the midst of the chaos, Jake felt a shift within himself. "You want to see theatrics? Let's show them," he thought, his mind racing with the realization of who he truly was. He got up from his wheelchair and reached into his pocket to pull out his CEO badge, holding it high for all to see, the glint of metal reflecting the fluorescent lights above. "Enough!" Jake's voice boomed, cutting through the whispers in apprehension. "I am Jake Black, the CEO of this bank, and I demand that every single one of you is treated with the respect you deserve." Gasps echoed through the bank, and the crowd's reaction was palpable. Faces turned from confusion to shock, and then to intrigue. Tom, standing frozen in disbelief, could barely comprehend the transformation of his apparent nuisance into the most powerful man in the room. Jake turned to the crowd, the urgency of the situation igniting a passion within him. "I've been here watching how you're treated, and I'm ashamed. This isn't just about policy. It's about people. It's about all of you." The customers began to rally, murmurs growing into a chorus of agreement. "Yes, we deserve better," shouted a middle-aged man, his voice laden with frustration. "I've been waiting for over an hour. Your bank is horrible." With newfound determination, Jake walked toward the nearest customer, a young woman clutching her toddler. "What about you? What's your experience been like?" The woman, still in shock, hesitated before speaking. I just I came here to open an account, but I've been waiting and no one seems to care. It's like we don't matter." Jake's heart ached for her. "You matter. All of you matter. This bank was built to serve you, and it's time we start doing that properly." As he moved from customer to customer, Jake listened intently, taking notes on their frustrations and suggestions. He heard tales of long waits, dismissive attitudes, and the feeling of being just another number in the system. Each story fueled his resolve, and he realized that the only way to drive change was to confront the issues head-on. "Sir, we need to continue our work," Tom finally interjected, his voice trembling with irritation. "Work?" Jake shot back, his gaze piercing. "I'm not seeing work here. I'm seeing a big mess." Tom's face flushed with embarrassment, but Jake didn't care. He was done tiptoeing around the issues. "From now on, I'll be here regularly, and I'll be talking to you all. Together we'll create a system that values every single one of you." The customers erupted in applause, a wave of solidarity washing over them. In that moment, the atmosphere shifted from one of frustration to empowerment. They were no longer passive victims of poor service. The CEO was there for them to complain. Jake turned back to the employees who had gathered near the entrance, their expressions a mix of confusion and curiosity. "You're part of this too. Each of you has a role in how we treat our customers. If you're not willing to engage with them, then you're not doing your job." He saw a few employees exchanging glances, their apprehension melting away as they began to understand the gravity of the situation. "Let's work together to fix this," he continued, his voice steady. "I need your input. Let's brainstorm solutions. What can we do to make this bank a place where people feel valued?" The tension in the room began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of camaraderie that had been missing for far too long. Employees stepped forward, sharing their insights while customers offered their suggestions with renewed hope. For the first time, the bank felt like a community rather than a cold corporate entity. In that chaotic yet transformative scene, Jake Black realized that he had not just uncovered the issues plaguing his bank. He had ignited a movement toward change that would ripple far beyond that single branch. The lessons he learned about empathy and the importance of listening were not just for him. They were crucial for everyone involved. As the discussions continued, the sense of urgency transitioned into a collective determination. Jake's heart swelled with pride as he witnessed the birth of a new culture, one that would prioritize understanding and support for both customers and employees alike. It was a beginning, a pivotal moment that paved the way for a brighter future for the bank and everyone it served. Later on, Jake entered the back offices of the agency. Inside, the air was thick with a sense of disorganization. Paperwork was strewn across desks, and the employees were clustered together, their conversations hushed as they exchanged glances at the unexpected intruder. This was not the polished, efficient environment he had envisioned for his bank. Instead, it resembled a chaotic mess where apathy reigned supreme. "Gather around, everyone," Jake called out, his voice steady despite the uncertainty that churned within him. "We need to talk." The employees shuffled about, unsure of how to respond. Jake could see the tension in their faces, a mixture of surprise and annoyance at being interrupted during what was likely their usual routine. Among them, he recognized Amy, a customer service representative who had been particularly attentive to him during his earlier ordeal. She looked up, her eyes wide with uncertainty, but she stepped forward. Sir, we were just," she started, but Jake waved off her words. "I know what you were just doing, and that's precisely the problem. We've just witnessed how our customers are treated, and I want to hear from you about what's happening here. What are the barriers? Why is there such a disconnect between us and our clients?" There was a hesitant silence as the employees glanced at one another, unsure if they could voice their frustrations in front of their CEO. Finally, it was Mark, an older man with graying hair and tired eyes, who spoke up. "It's Tom, sir. His management style is, well, it's not great. He doesn't listen to us, and he certainly doesn't care about how we interact with customers." Jake felt a rush of disappointment wash over him. The manager he had encountered earlier, Tom had struck him as dismissive and arrogant, but hearing this confirmed his fears. "What do you mean he doesn't listen?" Jake pressed. "Every time we've tried to bring up issues or suggest improvements, he brushes us off," Mark continued, his voice steadying with conviction. "He's always in a rush, always acting aggressively with anyone in the agency. It's hard to put our best foot forward when we're not supported." "Exactly," chimed in Amy. "We're overwhelmed. We want to help our customers, but we're often stretched too thin. It feels like we're just here to meet quotas." Jake nodded, absorbing their words. He had come to this bank in disguise to understand the plight of his customers, but perhaps he had overlooked the struggles of his employees. Tom needs to understand that this bank is not just about numbers. It's about people, both our customers and our team. And people have lives. As the conversation unfolded, more employees began to share their grievances. They spoke of long hours, unrealistic expectations, and a pervasive sense of neglect that stemmed from top-down management. Jake realized that the toxicity in the workplace was not merely a reflection of Tom's leadership. It was a systemic issue that needed addressing. "So what do you think we should do?" Jake asked, his eyes sweeping over the group. "How can we change this culture?" There was a moment of hesitation, but then Amy spoke up again. "We need more open communication. We need to feel like our voices matter. Maybe regular meetings where we can discuss issues could help?" Jake considered her suggestion. "I agree. We need to create a platform for you all to express your concerns without fear of retribution. And I want to be a part of that. I need you all to know that I'm here to support you, not just as your boss but as a colleague who believes in this bank's mission." Encouraged by his words, the employees began to discuss more ideas. A sense of camaraderie began to form in the room, a shared vision of what the bank could become, if only they were given the chance. As the conversation flowed, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was the change he had been searching for all along. Just as the atmosphere began to lighten, the door swung open, and Tom sauntered in, his expression a mixture of irritation and confusion. "What's going on here?" he barked, eyeing the group. "Why is everyone gathered? We have customers to serve." Jake met Tom's gaze, feeling the tension in the room shift dramatically. "Tom, we're discussing how to improve our customer service and employee morale," Jake replied firmly. Tom crossed his arms, his brows knitting together. "And since when is it our priority to sit around and chat? We need to focus on results, not feelings. Results come from a motivated team, Tom." Jake shot back, his patience wearing thin. "If you continue to neglect your employees, the results will dwindle. You cannot lead by fear and expect loyalty." Tom scoffed, his disdain palpable. "This is a business, Jake. Emotions don't factor into profitability. You should know that better than anyone." Jake inhaled deeply, his heart racing. "And that's precisely why we're having this conversation. You're mistaking short-term gains for long-term success. A happy employee leads to a happy customer. It's a simple equation that you seem unwilling to grasp. I've been managing this branch for years, and we've always hit our targets." Tom retorted, his voice rising. "You're just being emotional because of what happened earlier." "Emotional?" Jake echoed, incredulity lacing his tone. "This isn't about emotions, it's about reality. If you can't see the bigger picture, then maybe you're the one who needs to reconsider your role here." The room fell silent, the atmosphere thick with tension, as Tom's face flushed with anger. "You think you can just waltz in here dressed as a customer and tell me how to do my job?" he spat, his hands clenched into fists. "I'm here as your CEO, and I'm telling you that this isn't working," Jake replied, his voice unwavering. "You're driving away both customers and employees. You need to change, or I will have to make a decision regarding your future in this bank." "You think I don't care, Jake?" Tom snapped, his voice low but filled with emotion. "I see these people every day. I see the bills they can't pay, the worry in every customer's face. But what can I do? I'm squeezed from both sides. If we don't hit the targets, we all lose. You blame me for trying to keep this place afloat." Jake stood silent, surprised by Tom's outburst. For the first time, he saw the manager not as a villain, but as someone trapped in a system beyond his control. "This isn't about blame, Tom. It's about finding a way to break this cycle together." Tom's expression contorted with rage, and without another word, he stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The employees stood in stunned silence, the air heavy with unspoken words. Jake took a moment to gather his thoughts, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. He had stood his ground, but the fallout from this confrontation was far from over. "I know that was tense," he finally said, breaking the silence. "But I want you all to know that I'm committed to making this a better place for everyone. We will hold regular meetings, and I want your input every step of the way." Slowly, the employees began to nod, some even exchanging hopeful glances. The energy in the room had shifted. There was now a flicker of hope that perhaps change was on the horizon. Jake smiled, reassured by their response. It was time to rebuild, to foster a culture of empathy and understanding, not just for the customers, but for everyone who walked through those doors. At the end of the day, as Jake mentally replayed the events he had witnessed, a troubling question began to take shape. He wondered if it was really possible to change the bank's culture. Maybe, he thought, he was trying to swim against the current. The system he had helped build wasn't designed for empathy. It was built for efficiency and profit, as Tom defended. Was his vision of a more humane bank just a fantasy? Or was there truly a way to balance both worlds? He didn't have the answers yet, but he knew he would need to find them before moving forward. However, the aftermath of the public confrontation weighed heavily on Jake Black. Sitting in his penthouse, he scrolled through the endless stream of comments and videos that flooded social media. Someone had recorded his little acting scene and uploaded online. The public's perception of him was rapidly shifting from a misunderstood billionaire trying to instigate change to an insensitive tyrant attacking an employee. But the vandalism that followed was a stark reminder of the anger brewing in the community. In the morning, graffiti adorned the walls of his bank, slogans demanding respect and equality splattered in vivid colors across the glass facade. Jake took a deep breath, staring out at Central Park, the vibrant green a stark contrast to the turmoil he felt inside. He had embarked on this undercover journey to understand the struggles of his customers and employees. Yet here he was, the villain in a story he had hoped to rewrite. The thought of the vandalism made his stomach churn, not just because it damaged his property, but because it highlighted a disconnect he had failed to address. "James, we need to close the bank," he said, his voice steady but low. The driver turned in his seat, surprise flickering across his face. "Temporarily," Jake added. "We need to renovate, not just the physical space, but the culture. We need to create an environment where everyone feels valued." James nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I'll start the paperwork for a temporary closure. Are you sure about this?" "It's time," Jake replied, determination creeping into his tone. "We can't keep operating as usual. If we want to change the narrative, we have to start from the ground up." Days passed as the bank's employees were informed about the temporary closure for renovations. Jake spent time in meetings with contractors, discussing accessibility improvements and redesigning the customer experience. He also began to reach out to mental health professionals, wanting to ensure that both customers and employees felt supported and understood. One evening, as Jake was reviewing plans for the new customer service layout, he received a message from Tom, the dismissive manager he had confronted. It was short and to the point. "Can we talk?" Jake hesitated. The confrontation had been explosive, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to face Tom again. Still, he knew that this situation wouldn't resolve itself without addressing the issues head-on. He replied, agreeing to meet at a local cafe. The following day, Jake arrived at the cafe early, fidgeting with the napkin on his table. When Tom walked in, he looked different, wearier, with dark circles under his eyes. The manager approached hesitantly, and Jake motioned for him to sit down. "Thanks for meeting me," Tom said, his voice low. "Of course. I wanted to understand where you're coming from," Jake replied. He took a sip of his coffee and set the cup down, looking directly at Tom. "I know our last interaction was intense," Tom nodded, running a hand through his hair. "I've been thinking about it a lot. I've been under a lot of pressure, and I let it affect how I treated customers in my team." "Pressure?" Jake asked, raising an eyebrow. "You mean the pressure of being a manager?" Tom sighed deeply. "Yes, but it goes beyond that. I've been dealing with burnout for a while now. It's hard to keep up the enthusiasm when you're exhausted. I didn't handle my stress well. I took it out on customers and my staff." Jake could see the vulnerability in Tom's eyes, and for the first time, he felt a sense of empathy. "I had no idea you were struggling like that. I thought you were just indifferent." "I was," Tom admitted, his voice cracking slightly. "But it wasn't just indifference. I felt trapped. I didn't want to be the bad guy, but I didn't know how to change." Jake leaned back in his chair, absorbing Tom's word. He realized that the manager's attitude had roots in a much deeper issue. A systemic problem that involved not just him, but the entire workplace culture they had created. "What do you think we can do to change that? How can we create a space where you and the employees feel supported?" Tom looked up, surprise mingling with hope. "I think we need to talk about mental health openly. It can't be taboo anymore. We need workshops, resources, something that helps everyone feel like they can talk about their struggles without fear of judgment." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "That's a great idea. We can bring in professionals to conduct sessions and make it a regular part of our culture. It needs to be normalized." Their conversation flowed from there, both men sharing their experiences and suggesting ways to foster a healthier environment. They discussed the possibility of implementing an employee assistance program and creating an open-door policy where staff could express their concerns without fear of repercussions. As they wrapped up their meeting, Jake felt a sense of camaraderie forming between them. "I appreciate your honesty, Tom," he said earnestly. "I want to work with you to make things better. I know we can turn this around, but it has to start with us." "Thank you, Jake," Tom replied, a newfound sense of determination in his eyes. "I want to be part of that change. I want to be better for my team." With that, they parted ways, each feeling a bit lighter than before. Jake returned to his penthouse, invigorated by the conversation. The following days were filled with brainstorming sessions and planning, as Jake and Tom collaborated to create a new vision for the bank. They reached out to mental health professionals for suggestions and organized focus groups with employees to gather input on their needs and concerns. As the renovations progressed, the physical space began to reflect their commitment to change. The once dull and chaotic interior transformed into a welcoming environment with open spaces, comfortable seating, and a designated area for mental health resources. With each passing day, Jake felt more hopeful about the future. The viral backlash had been painful, but it had also opened the door for necessary conversations that had long been ignored. He realized that true leadership wasn't just about making profits, but about creating a culture where everyone felt valued and understood. In the midst of this transformation, Jake found himself reflecting on the power of vulnerability. He had set out to learn about the struggles of others, but in doing so, he had unveiled his own. This journey was not just about fixing the bank. It was about reshaping his understanding of empathy and compassion, not just for his customers, but for those who worked alongside him. As the bank prepared to reopen, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose. He understood that change would take time, but he was ready to embrace the challenge. He had reached a pivotal point, one that offered the possibility of genuine transformation, not just for himself, but for the entire institution he had built. The next morning, the bank reopened its doors, transformed not just in appearance, but in spirit. The renovations were more than cosmetic. They represented a new commitment to customer care and employee support. The lobby was brighter, more inviting, with comfortable seating areas where customers could relax while waiting. Everything was properly adapted to handicapped individuals, and banners promoting mental health awareness decorated the walls, signaling a shift in priorities. As Jake and Tom stood at the entrance, welcoming employees and customers alike, a sense of camaraderie filled the air. Staff members were excited, chatting animatedly about the changes, eager to implement the new policies they had brainstormed together. "Good morning, everyone," Jake called out, his voice booming with enthusiasm. "Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for our bank. We're not just here to serve our customers. We're here to support each other. Let's make this a place where everyone feels valued." The employees erupted in cheers, a palpable energy surging through the crowd. Tom stepped forward, a spark of confidence in his eyes. "I want to thank each of you for your hard work and dedication. We're all in this together, and I'm here to listen and support you. This is a team, and we're going to succeed as one." As the day unfolded, Jake and Tom moved through the bank, engaging with customers, listening to their stories, and addressing their needs. They took the time to connect, to ensure that every individual felt seen and heard. The transformation was evident, not just in the bank's operations, but in the atmosphere. A sense of unity had taken root. At the end of the day, Jake and Tom stood together, surveying the bustling lobby filled with satisfied customers and smiling employees. "Look at this," Jake said, a wide grin spreading across his face. "This is what it's all about." Tom nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "I never thought we could turn things around this quickly. It feels good to be part of something meaningful again." Jake placed a hand on Tom's shoulder. "We've come a long way, and this is just the beginning. Let's keep pushing for change for ourselves and for everyone who walks through those doors." As they shared a moment of camaraderie, Jake realized that true wealth was not measured by numbers or assets, but by the understanding and compassion they fostered within their community. Together, they were not just rebuilding a bank. They were nurturing a culture of empathy, one that would resonate far beyond the walls of their institution. In that moment, Jake felt a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that the journey of personal growth, friendship, and transformation had a new beautiful chapter.